Next on the news.
I'm standing here in front of a sign that's threatening my life.
Pro-abortion activists targeting several locations and churches nationwide as the Senate gears up for a vote codifying Roe v. Wade. Plus,
we're here today to announce new legislation to protect and expand access to abortion.
A new proposal in New York to funnel $50 million to increase access to abortions. And it dates back to the 1600s. Now artifacts are still being found. We'll speak with an archaeologist about the amazing finds at the site where one of the first brick Catholic churches was built in the U.S. Plus, the 70-year-old Christian pastor who's climbing one of the highest mountains in the world for a cause that's close to her heart. I'm Christine Persichetti. Currents News starts right now. Catholics spending Mother's Day praying for unborn babies as pro-abortion protesters converge on churches nationwide. From New York to D.C. to Wisconsin, protests were held outside of churches, the Supreme Court, even the homes of some of the justices. There's also been a report that Old St. Patrick's Cathedral received threats to bomb and burn down the church. And now the battle over abortion may be heading to the Senate floor. Protesters gathered outside of Old St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan on Mother's Day to show their support for Roe v. Wade.
Show unto us the blessed fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
As pro-lifers stood on the church steps to pray.
My body, my choice.
Scenes like this playing out around the country after that Supreme Court draft opinion was leaked, showing the justices may overturn the ruling which established a right to abortion 50 years ago.
Once they take away abortion, they're going to take away birth control. I mean, who knows what comes next? It's a slippery slope.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says he'll file a motion for a procedural vote, which could see a full Senate vote on the controversial issue Wednesday.
I think Roe v. Wade created a constitutional right that doesn't exist in the written Constitution. It's created division from the first day it was decided until now.
The Women's Health Protection Act bill to codify Roe, pushed by Schumer and other Senate Democrats, would need at least 10 Republican votes to overcome a GOP filibuster. Hitting that threshold is unlikely.
If America's people, America's women and men who love them, do not fight, right now we will lose the basic right to make decisions, to have bodily autonomy, and to decide what our futures look like.
13 states have so-called trigger laws, which would quickly ban abortion if Roe is overturned. One of those states is Mississippi, and its governor, Tate Reeves, says ending Roe would be a big win for abortion opponents.
We're trying to provide those potential expectant mothers the resources that they need so that they can go to a full term of pregnancy. If they choose to keep that child, then that's a great outcome.
New York Attorney General Letitia James unveiling a bill to expand and protect access to abortions in the state.
And we are taking action today to make sure that remains true here in New York, both for New Yorkers and for people living in states that are poised to ban abortions.
James is helping to spearhead the legislation called the Reproductive Freedom and Equity Program. Under the proposal, $50 million in state funds will be funneled to abortion providers across New York. The New York State Catholic Conference released a statement on the proposal, saying in part, now some officials want to make abortion a tourism industry like Broadway or Niagara Falls for out-of-state residents. This is appalling. We believe the state should focus on its own residents and making New York a more welcoming culture for women in crisis pregnancies who would choose to keep their babies if only they had the supports and resources they deserve. The NYPD stepping up its presence at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan this weekend. The department actually had officers inside the church for Sunday Mass. Fortunately, there were no incidents. The NYPD also instructed officers to drive by Catholic churches at least twice per tour between midnight on Friday and midnight on Sunday. A group of pro-abortion protesters marched in Chevy Chase, Maryland, to the homes of Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Brett Kavanaugh. The group of about 100 people was organized by Shut Down D.C. Outgoing White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki spoke out against the protests, saying the nation's top judges must be able to do their jobs without concern for their safety. Police in Wisconsin are investigating what they're calling a targeted arson at a pro-life organization Sunday. Madison police say someone threw a Molotov cocktail into the Wisconsin Family Action Office. Talil Mohildeen has the story.
Smoke damage, the water damage, the glass damage, all of that. It's just, it's terrible.
For Julaine Appling, an unexpected trip to her office on Mother's Day.
The building management got a hold of me about 7:45 and told me that there had been a breach in our office.
Inside, clear signs of fire damage, and outside, vandalism.
I'm standing here in front of a sign that's threatening my life.
The words, "If abortions aren't safe, then you aren't either," spray painted on the building's walls.
I respect the right for people to disagree with them, but we've never had anything that materialized like this.
Damage to the Office of Wisconsin Family Action, an anti-abortion nonprofit, which the group's president believes was motivated by the possible overturning of Roe v. Wade.
They have every right to be angry, but the anger cannot translate into what you're looking at behind me or what you saw in my office.
But not knowing by whom.
We truly are trusting people. I never even thought about security cameras.
Appling now worried about the safety of her staff.
They may not have been killed because it wasn't that strong, but you certainly would have been harmed by just supplying glass.
But standing firm in her beliefs.
I'm not going to back down on our opinion. We're not going to take a different position and change what we believe at our core.
That was Talil Mohildeen reporting. The bishop of the Diocese of Madison, Donald Hying, released a statement on the incident, reading in part, "The graffitied message, 'If abortions aren't safe, you aren't either,' shows this attack to be explicitly against pro-life Americans who seek to protect the precious gift of life in the womb. Abortion is violence, not only against the unborn child, but also women, men, and families." The NYPD's Hate Crime Task Force is investigating an attack on a rabbi in Brooklyn. This is video of the man police are looking for. Detectives say he punched the 32-year-old victim in the head on Friday afternoon and then kicked him in the legs. The suspect yelled anti-Semitic remarks before running off. Now, New York is actually leading the nation when it comes to anti-Semitic incidents. 2021 saw nearly a quarter increase of cases over 2020, and the numbers are even uglier up close. 183 incidents of harassment and nearly as many cases of vandalism. A 40% increase on attacks on Jewish institutions like synagogues and schools. 94% of the assaults in New York City target Orthodox and Hasidic Jews. Some of these numbers are the highest ever recorded by the Anti-Defamation League since they started keeping track in 1979. The man accused of shooting 10 people at a Brooklyn subway station last month has been indicted in federal court. Frank James now faces one count of a terrorist attack as well as a firearms charge, both of which carry maximum sentences of life in prison if he's convicted. James was arrested on April 13th, about 30 hours after authorities say he unleashed smoke bombs and a hail of bullets in a train full of commuters near Sunset Park. New York lawmakers are looking to pass a package of bills in hopes of preventing another disaster like the Bronx apartment fire that killed 17 people in January. The measure would increase penalties for violations of building and fire code standards. They would also require space heaters sold in New York to have thermostats and automatic shutoffs. It comes after investigators determined that a malfunctioning space heater was to blame for the Bronx fire. Russian President Vladimir Putin says the West left him no choice but to invade Ukraine. He made the comments during Russia's much-anticipated Victory Day event. Chris Wynn has the latest.
In Russia, a Victory Day parade commemorating the country's defeat of Nazi Germany at the end of World War II. Russian President Vladimir Putin reiterating his accusation that the West left him no choice but to invade Ukraine and offering few clues on the direction of the conflict.
Russia repelled this aggression in a preventive way. This was the only correct decision.
Over the weekend, a new slate of sanctions, with the U.S. cutting off Kremlin-controlled media outlets from American advertisers and banning Russia from using some American consulting services.
There was no reason for him to either declare victory or declare a war that he has already been carrying on for more than 2 months.
On Monday, the president of the European Council was forced to take shelter during a visit to Odessa as missiles struck the region. This following First Lady Jill Biden's unexpected Mother's Day trip to western Ukraine. Her visit to an active war zone, a rarity from the spouse of a sitting U.S. president. Meanwhile, dozens are feared dead in the Luhansk region after Russians were accused of bombing a school sheltering Ukrainians over the weekend. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky vowing his country will win the war.
We are free people who have their own path. Today, we are waging war on this path, and we will not give anyone a single piece of our land.
Chris Wynn, Currents News.
The Secretary of State for Pope Francis reaffirming the Holy Father's offer to travel to Moscow to help stop the war in Ukraine. Cardinal Pietro Parolin says they are now waiting for the Kremlin to respond. Pope Francis had the cardinal send the offer to Putin in mid-March. The Pope wanted to convince Putin to stop the war or at least respect humanitarian corridors to evacuate civilians. There's a lot more news headed your way. We'll chat with an archaeologist who's digging up clues about Catholic colonists, how they're recreating a lost piece of the church's history. Plus, she's not even old enough to drive, but that didn't stop this Ukrainian teen from driving through battlefields to get help for 2 men wounded in the war. And a miracle amid a tornado, how a man in Kansas saved his wife's life. When we return. In 1665, the first brick Catholic church was built in St. Mary's City, Maryland. It was destroyed and forgotten about, but in the 20th century, archaeologists discovered remnants of it. To this day, they're still uncovering artifacts important to the Catholic Church at that site. Henry Miller is one of those archaeologists who's been working on excavations at the historic site since 1988. He joins us now. Hi, Henry.
Well, good day. Hello.
So nice to have you with us. So what can you tell us about this church that was found? You know, why is it so special, and what surprised you about it?
Well, it was, again, built in the 1660s, closed up in 1704 when policies changed in Maryland. But it was the first major Catholic church anywhere in the English colonies. And the importance of it is that it could not have been constructed anywhere else in the English-speaking world at the time because it was forbidden for Catholics to have churches. So a really foundational part for the modern American Catholic Church.
Wow. And I know a medal to Our Lady of Pilar was found at the site of the church, but many other religious artifacts were found at nearby homes. So what's been found, and what does it tell us about life for Catholics at that time?
Well, yeah, the number of crucifixes, rosaries, rosary beads, as well as medals of especially the Jesuit saints were found. And these were items that were forbidden to be used in England during this era. But this was a very unusual situation where people truly had the opportunity to exercise their faith in complete freedom during this period. Important step forward in human rights, I believe.
Absolutely. And while the altar and pulpit haven't been found, you did find 2 artifacts from the original church. Tell us what they are and where they are now.
Well, one is we believe that there was a iron cross on top of the church at the facade end. That actually has a long history and is today at Georgetown University, and it's on display in their chapel. The other one, though, is even more fascinating. It is a wooden tabernacle that was in the Carroll family, the famous Carroll family of Maryland, and it was in the home of Charles Carroll of Carrollton, the only Catholic to sign the Declaration of Independence. And we are in the process of reproducing that item as for our chapel, and will be completely gold leaf covered and a beautiful piece of religious art that directly relates to this chapel.
Wow, and speaking of reproductions, I know you're in the process of building a replica of the church using handmade bricks like they did centuries ago. How exciting has this been for you and others working on the project?
It's been an absolutely fascinating project, one that I've been privileged to be a part of. And by rebuilding this, it is an exhibit about the story of religion in early America and how the idea of freedom of religion actually was first instituted by Catholics at a place called St. Mary's City in a colony of Maryland.
It really is incredible. I'm looking forward to maybe one day coming down and checking it out myself. Archaeologist Henry Miller from the St. Mary's City Historic Site. Thanks so much for being with us.
No, thank you.
It's an incredible story of courage and survival out of the war in Ukraine. A 15-year-old Ukrainian girl drove 2 wounded men through several battlefields to safety despite being injured and bleeding herself. Isa Suarez has the story.
This is the face of bravery. Meet 15-year-old Anastasia, a courageous and defiant teenager, now recovering from her injuries in Lviv. What about your legs? The nurse asks her. They came under fire, she replies. As her hometown of Popasna was pummeled by Russian artillery, she wanted to help 2 wounded men get to a hospital. The help was urgently needed, so as not to lose a lot of blood, she says. So she picked up the car keys. And I had to get behind the wheel, she says. They made their way across the bridge, desperate to get to a hospital in Bakhmut. We have a bridge and we had mines there in a checkerboard pattern. There was no way to get through, but I somehow made it. And further along, there was the corpse of a woman, she says. Worse was to come. A burst of machine gun fire raked the car. I was driving the car and then the Russians fired on us, she says. When they started shooting, the car stopped and then I started the car again and drove on. Even though she was injured and bleeding, time was running out. The car stalled because the battery was shot through by a bullet. By then, Ukrainian soldiers were on hand to rescue Anastasia and her passengers. Now they're all recovering, thanks to the courage of a very young driver.
That was Isa Suarez reporting. Anastasia was originally a passenger in the car as she fled frontline fighting with 3 men and another woman, but she had to grab the wheel after an exploding shell seriously injured her driver and another man in the car. President Biden will deliver remarks on Tuesday on how to battle rising inflation in the U.S. He's expected to detail his plan to lower costs for working families. A CNN poll released last week found that 8 in 10 U.S. adults feel the government isn't doing enough to curb inflation. It's considered a key economic concern for voters ahead of the midterm elections in November. The pain at the pump is creeping back. Fuel prices are being pushed higher by increasing demand and inflation. According to GasBuddy.com, the national average for a gallon of regular is now $4.32. That's up 15 cents from the start of the month. And New York City is seeing its highest gas prices ever, with an average of $4.60 per gallon. And the nationwide shortage of baby formula is also getting worse. Already in 6 states, more than half of formula supplies have been sold out. And supply chain issues have prompted major retailers like Target and CVS to place limits on customer purchases. Some experts say the FDA shutdown of an Abbott nutrition manufacturing plant in Michigan is only compounding the problem. It was a miraculous rescue out of Wichita, Kansas. A man pulled his wife to safety after a tornado flattened their home. Eli Higgins has the harrowing story.
The lights went out, and 2 seconds later, my house had flipped and spun and was totally demolished.
James Moore is still in shock after living his worst nightmare Friday, thinking he lost his wife, Kathy, the love of his life, for 37 years.
When you're in a house full of heavy objects and you're tumbling with them, it's kind of hard to tell what hit you.
He lived in one of the first houses hit by the tornado. After digging himself out of a pile of debris, he had only one thing on his mind: finding his wife.
I mean, I started looking around and calling my wife's name, and I kept calling it.
But for a moment, time stood still. She wasn't responding.
Finally, I was screaming it, and then I heard her crying.
Crying in pain, but alive. He found her trapped under a pile of rubble and a giant piece of the roof that fell on her. That's when he says a miracle happened.
And I started just lifting it off of her. I didn't have... Normally, I don't have the muscles for that stuff.
James is disabled and says there's no way he should have had the strength to get her out. But once she was in his arms, nothing else mattered.
When I found her, we sat there and I hugged, and I told her I loved her, and she said she loved me. I held her till the EMS showed up.
Kathy is still in the ICU with a broken back and an injury to her head, but she's going to be okay. James ended up with deep cuts on his arm and a torn ligament from lifting the roof off of her, showing us the devastating damage just days later. He doesn't even know where to start.
It's my back porch steps there.
But says he's just grateful he still has what will always mean the most: his wife, his best friend.
That was Eli Higgins reporting. James says Kathy was released from the ICU on Friday. She'll spend 2 to 4 weeks in assisted living while completing physical therapy. Just incredible. Still to come on Currents News, pushing past perceived limitations, how Hot Wheels is expanding representation for kids who use wheelchairs. Plus, preparations are underway why this 70-year-old pastor has her sights set on Mount Kilimanjaro. You might remember this old commercial that gripped 90s kids all over the country. Hot Wheels leading the way. The company dropped that slogan years ago, but now they really are leading the way, but in a different kind of race. The race for representation. For kids in wheelchairs, Hot Wheels is stepping up its game. Check it out. The company's first ever remote-controlled wheelchair toy. It was created in collaboration with 5-time wheelchair motocross world champion and Paralympic athlete Aaron Wheels Fotheringham. He's known for performing elaborate tricks and backflips in his wheelchair. In fact, the toy was crafted to mimic Fotheringham's custom-built wheelchair and features a built-in action figure made to look like him, a remote control, and a ramp so users can perform tricks like he does. Hot Wheels hopes the toy will inspire kids to push past perceived limitations. Need one? You can buy it on Amazon. And here's another win for people with disabilities. A school in Georgia created a yearbook for the blind. That way they can remember their friends' faces with their fingertips. But how do they do that? The wonders of 3D printing. Using that technology, the school created moldings of students' faces. That way, years from now, the graduating class can keep in touch with their friends like never before. Now to a woman on a mission, not to move mountains, but to climb them. And not just any mountain. We're talking about Mount Kilimanjaro. Meet Pastor Sylvia Tisdale, a pastor from Pensacola. The Christian woman is 70 years old and has been training 2 hours a day for the past 5 months to make the trek. But why? She hopes her climb will raise money for and bring awareness to hunger and food insecurity.
Mentally I'm prepared, and then I've been working out to do all that I could possibly do physically. So I feel when I do my part, God will do the rest.
The pastor runs a soup kitchen and food distribution center, which is why the mission is so close to her heart. And the countdown is on. She'll step off next month, and we will be watching. Good luck to her. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.